the Passion narrative of Matthew's Gospel, chapter 26. When Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." Then the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and took counsel together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they said, "Not during the feasts, lest there be a tumult among the people." All right. The people had been just proclaiming Jesus king, all right, son of David, on Palm Sunday. So Jesus goes to Bethany, and there's a couple different episodes where Jesus has his feet anointed by a woman. This is a different event than what's recorded in Luke chapter 7, verse 36. Okay, in Luke chapter 7, a similar story takes place, but they're two separate episodes. Now, when Jesus was at Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came up to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive ointment, and she poured it on his head as he sat at table. So notice Jesus is being anointed, or he's being christened prior to his passion. This woman is Mary, the sister of Martha, and also the sister of Lazarus, who Jesus raised from the dead. We get that information from the Gospel of John, chapter 12. The woman is identified as Mary. But when the disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, "Why this waste? For this ointment might have been sold for a large sum and given to the poor." And then again from John's Gospel, we know that it's Judas Iscariot who makes that comment. And the reason Judas says that is because he was actually a thief, and he would steal money out of the collection that was given to the poor. Verse 10, "But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, 'Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. In pouring this ointment on my body, she has done it to prepare me for burial. Truly I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her.' Then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, 'What will you give me if I deliver him to you?' And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. And from that moment, he sought an opportunity to betray him." 30 pieces of silver. We learn in Zechariah chapter 11, verse 12, the book of that prophet, that 30 pieces of silver is the value of a slave. Verse 17. "Now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus saying, 'Where will you have us prepare for you to eat the Passover?' He said, 'Go into the city to such a one and say to him, the teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.' And the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover." So the Passover meal would have involved a sacrificed lamb. And pay attention, there's going to be no mention of a lamb at this meal. That is because Jesus is the new Passover lamb who fulfills that role. Okay, and his blood is going to be shed, just as the Passover lamb had its blood shed in the story of Exodus, right? For the salvation of the Israelites, Christ is going to shed his blood and also provide his flesh as food for the new Israel, for the church. When it was evening, he sat at table with the 12 disciples. And as they were eating, he said, "Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me." And they were very sorrowful and began to say to him one after another, "Is it I, Lord?" He answered, "He who has dipped his hand in the dish with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born." Judas, who betrayed him, said, Is it I, Master? He said to him, You have said so. Now, as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, Take, eat, this is my body. All right, so this is Jesus filling in as the Passover lamb. At the point of the meal when they would have eaten the lamb, Jesus then offers them the bread, all right, his body, to be the sustenance for their journey. Also, this is reminiscent of the priesthood of Melchizedek. Melchizedek in Genesis, is that Genesis 11 or 10, offers a sacrifice of bread and wine. And this is the same, that priesthood of Melchizedek, where the priest offers bread and wine, is also the same priesthood of King David. King David offers bread and wine. And Jesus is, of course, a part of that lineage. And he took a chalice, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. The blood of the covenant. Covenants are ratified in blood. If you recall back in the book of Exodus, I believe it's Exodus 20, all right, Moses sprinkles the people of Israel with the blood of a sacrifice bull, and that is what ratifies the covenant. And so this new covenant that was prophesied by Jeremiah and Ezekiel, right, the new covenant that God was going to make with his people is now made with Christ, and then his blood is the blood in which it's ratified in. And so through Christ's blood, we enter into this covenant, right? That's why baptism has its life-giving imagery, but then it's also a lot of death imagery as well, because water can destroy. And so in baptism, you're submerged under the water, right, symbolizing your death, and you come out a new creation. You have died with Christ, okay, and then through Christ's death, right, his blood, shedding blood being image of death, you then rise to new life, and you're ratified into the new covenant. Verse 21, I tell you, I shall not drink again of this fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. All right, wine was a daily drink back then. So this is an indication that he's going to die very soon. Verse 30, and when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Psalms 115 through 118 were traditionally sung as the hymns at the conclusion of a Passover meal. So Psalm 115 through 118 is what Christ and his apostles would have sung on their way out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, You will all fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter declared to him, Though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. Jesus said to him, Truly I say to you, this very night, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And so said all the disciples. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, Sit here while I go over there and pray. And taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, right, these are the 3 mighty men, Peter, James, and John, that parallel David's 3 mighty men that he would be his closest companions. Verse 38, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me. All right, Exodus chapter 12, verse 42. The night of the Passover in Exodus was a night of watching, because the Israelites, they were to sacrifice the Passover lamb. They were then to eat its flesh and put its blood on the doorposts of their homes. And then that night, the angel of death would go through and slay all the firstborn of the land. And then before the sun rose, the Egyptians would basically evict the Israelites out of the land. Okay, so the Passover is described in Exodus as a night of watching. Right, the Israelites were waiting. They'd eaten their meal, but they ate their meal with their travel clothes on and ready to go, with their items packed. waiting for that eviction notice. And so Christ then invites his three closest apostles, Peter, James, and John, to keep watch with him. And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, "My Father, if it be possible, let this chalice pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." So Jesus is fully God and he is fully man. Right? His will is always lined up with his divine will. Right? His human will is always in perfect accord with his divine will. And the divine will is in perfect accord, right, with that of the Father's. So what's happening here? As a human, Jesus' human nature has a natural aversion towards death and suffering. Right? Jesus is just as human, or you could even say in some sense even more human than you or I. All right. So, Jesus had like his hand like burned by fire. He would have that natural aversion of like, nope, I don't. My human nature has a negative reaction to this. And so what's happening here, as explained by Christological theologians, is that Jesus's human will on a natural level is averting death. Like it does not want to undergo this, as any human would naturally not wish to do this. However, his will, although, is still choosing it because it is the Father's. So there's the natural aversion, but then the human will is also being perfectly in line with the divine will. All right, because Christ being fully man means he has a human intellect and a human will. And then because he's a divine person, he also has a divine will as well. All right, and the divine will and the human will are always lined up. But there's some, the body has its natural desires, so to speak, natural aversions and desires. And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words. I referenced how Jesus does repetitive prayer. He repeats the same prayer again and again. If you ever want to get into apologetics in regards to defense of Catholic devotions like the Rosary or the Divine Mercy Chaplet, where you repeat the same prayers again and again. Verse 45, then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." While he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I shall kiss is the man. Seize him." So in Middle Eastern cultures, a kiss is equivalent to a handshake. So, if you wanted to imagine this taking place in America, it'd be the one who I go and, shake hands with is the one that you want to capture. Why does Judas need to indicate the guy he's going to shake hands with? Because it's dark. All right. They're not street lamps out on the Mount of Olives. Okay. So you wouldn't know who to grab and who to arrest, right? There's going to be 12 people there, right? Jesus and the 11 other apostles. And so they got to grab the right one. As soon as they grab someone, they know everyone's going to scatter. So Judas is going to go in as the snake, the weasel, okay? Indicate with the kiss, right, which one Jesus is, so that the guards, right, of the chief priest can zero in on Jesus and immediately arrest him before he has a chance to flee. And he came up to Jesus once and said, "Hail, Master," and he kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, why are you here?" Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. We know from other gospels this is Peter. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled, that it must be so?" At that hour Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I sat in the temple, teaching, and you did not seize me. But all this has taken place that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. All right, so Jesus is letting the crowd that's come out to arrest him know that everything is happening so the scriptures could be fulfilled, so the prophets could be fulfilled. Who gave the prophets, all right, then the words to speak? God did. Or the prophets speak the word of God. Jesus is the word of God. Jesus is letting them know he's in total control of this situation. Then those who had seized Jesus led him to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. But Peter followed him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest, and going inside he sat with the guards to see the end. But the chief priests and the whole council sought false testimony against Jesus, that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last 2 came forward and said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days." And the high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But Jesus was silent. All right, in fulfillment of the prophet Isaiah, or in the suffering servant songs, like a lamb, Jesus being the Passover lamb, he was silently led to the slaughter. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." All right, tell us if you are the King, the Son of God, right? Another Davidic title. Jesus said to him, "You have said so." So he answers in the affirmative. And then Jesus takes it another step forward. "But I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his robes and said, "He has uttered blasphemy." All right, what did Jesus say that was blasphemous? Well, he identified himself as the Son of Man, all right, who is from the book of Daniel, who receives honor and glory and power from the Ancient of Days. And then Jesus also says that they will see him coming on the clouds of heaven, right, which is the chariot throne of the Ancient of Days. So Jesus has identified himself as both as the Son of Man and the Ancient of Days. All right, the 2 figures from Daniel are actually one. Right, Jesus is the Son of Man, one like a Son of Man, but then that one who is like the Son of Man is also God. So he is claimed equality with God. Hence, the high priest tears his robes and says Jesus has committed blasphemy. All right, so it's important to understand 2 Samuel chapter 7, right? That is the covenant God made with David, where you get all those Davidic titles of Christ, Son of God. And it's also important to understand the book of Daniel, as well as Ezekiel, all right? And when you understand those 2 prophets, all right, the Son of Man and the Ancient of Days and the prophecies about them, then you understand plainly what Jesus is saying here and why the high priest is reacting with the claim that blasphemy has been committed. I point this out to you because there are people out there who will read the Gospel of Matthew and they will miss all these indications because they don't understand the Hebrew Scriptures, or they don't understand the Old Testament. And you never get, in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus saying, "I am God." All right. It never gets that, I guess you never get that ordering of those words, so to speak. But here, you get quite an explicit claim from Jesus, identifying himself as the Ancient of Days, identifying himself as God. And then you also get the high priest reaction. All right, so Jesus does understand that he is God. And so anyone who, talks, they write books about Jesus the philosopher. It's total nonsense. Okay, Jesus did not see himself as a philosopher, and then the apostles and the Christians made up stories as regards to his divinity. The whole motive for the high priest killing him, all right, was blasphemy. That was the charge with which they found Jesus guilty of. All right. If Jesus didn't think he was God, if Jesus did not claim divinity, he would not have been crucified. All right. They would not have found him guilty. But because Jesus claims divinity, then you have the rest of the narrative continues with the passion. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment? They answered, he deserves death. Then they spat in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is it that struck you? All right, all this fulfills the suffering servant Psalms of Isaiah 50 and Isaiah 53. Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a maid came up to him and said, you also were with Jesus the Galilean. But he denied it before them, all saying, I do not know what you mean. And when he went out to the porch, another maid saw him, and she said to the bystanders, this man was with Jesus of Nazareth. And again he denied it with an oath, I do not know the man. After a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, certainly you are also one of them, for your accent betrays you. Then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, I do not know the man. And immediately the cock crowed. And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him to Pilate, the governor. All right, Pilate is in Jerusalem. Pilate's supposed to be in Caesarea Philippi, all right, which was the Roman center, okay, of Palestine. But because of all the turmoil that's been going on in Jerusalem, Pilate has been brought into Jerusalem to make sure to keep order. All right, so Pilate's main job on this trip to Jerusalem is to ensure peace in the province. That's what's on his mind. When Judas, verse 3, when Judas his betrayer saw that he was condemned, he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, I have sinned in betraying innocent blood. They said, what is that to us? See to it yourself. And throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself. Make a note to 2 Samuel chapter 17, verse 23. Antiophel, who was a companion of David, betrays King David. Remember, King David, when his son Absalom mounts a rebellion against his rule, David has to flee Jerusalem, and he goes up to the Mount of Olives. Okay, and David has his own agony in the garden. And when he's in the Mount of Olives, he finds that one of his close companions has betrayed him and gone to work with Absalom. And Antiophel, right, the man who went to go work with Absalom, he also ends up hanging himself in despair. Also, you contrast Peter's denial of Jesus. All right, Peter goes and he weeps bitterly, but then he ultimately turns in repentance, right, for his deeds. All right, and the first pope is forgiven, right? And so you see the human frailty of Peter, all right, the leader of the apostles, which is also super consoling for us because we all commit sins, right? But Peter was also a sinner, and he was also leader of the church and received forgiveness, right, for denying Christ, and he still had a mission to fulfill. And so the same is also true of each and every one of us. So all of us are going to commit sins in our lives. And you have to remember to respond the way Peter does and not the way Judas does. All right, Judas, if he could have stuck around and after the resurrection could have gone and sought forgiveness, right? And then Jesus would have forgiven him. But instead, Judas turns to despair and then commits suicide. So in your spiritual life, you never want to turn to despair and think that, you can't ever be forgiven for something. Verse 6, chapter 27, verse 6. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said, "It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since they are blood money." You can see the hypocrisy of these guys. So they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. Therefore that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, "And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him on whom a price had been set by some of the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me." All right, that's a reference back to Jeremiah chapter 32, verses 6 through 15. Now, Jesus stood before the governor, Pilate, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" All right, why does he ask him that? Well, Pilate knows what's been going on from Palm Sunday and such, okay? They said, "Hosanna, son of David, save us." That's the duty of the king. They lay down their robes, okay, before Jesus. That is the honor that you give to a king. Jesus said to him, "You have said so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he made no answer. Then Pilate said to them, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor wondered greatly. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. And Barabbas is Aramaic for son of the father, right? Bar is son of, and then Abba is father. So son of the father. So the crowd's going to have to choose between the son of the father or the son of the father, right? Jesus, the son of God, or Barabbas, the son of the father. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For they knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much over him today in a dream." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the people to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, whom is called Christ?" They all said, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this righteous man's blood. See to it yourselves." All right. And all the people answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. All right. So everyone is culpable in the death of Christ. The Romans, Pilate. Okay, Pilate has just violated Roman law. All right. Under Roman law, you can't execute someone who's innocent, and Pilate believes Jesus to be innocent. And so he washes his hands of the whole affair. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium, and they gathered the whole battalion before him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe upon him. And plaiting a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and put a reed in his right hand. And kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they spat upon him and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him and led him away to crucify him. As they were marching out, they came upon a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. This man they compelled to carry his cross, and when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink, mingled with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. Right? In fulfillment of Psalm number 22. Then they sat down and kept watch over him there, and over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. All right, and those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes and elders mocked him, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he desires him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. And then in Luke's gospel, you get the story of the good thief, that one of the thieves does end up repenting. Verse 45. Now from the 6th hour, there was darkness over the land until the 9th hour. So that's from noon to 3 p.m. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "This man is calling Elijah." So Psalm 22 begins with that expression, my God, why have you forsaken me?" But if you go back and you read Psalm 22, which we did when we were looking earlier at the Psalms, that's a psalm of hope and trust in God. And so it's common practice if you recite the first lines of a psalm, but you did not have time to complete the entire prayer. You could say the first lines, right, and that would be your prayer offered up. And Jesus being crucified, he has to choose between kicking his feet up on nails, okay, and holding his body up against the nails that he's hanging on. They're holding him up on the cross and breathing, or letting himself sag and then suffocate. And obviously, if you're suffocating, you can't speak very well. And so because Jesus is in turmoil, he lets out this prayer, okay, reciting the first line. And that would have been recognized as meaning the rest of the prayer, the rest of the psalm that also follows. Okay, crucifixion, you die by suffocation, is the means by which you actually die, okay, because of the way the body is being hung. And you basically use all your strength to hold your body up until your strength expires or you can't deal with the pain anymore. And then you finally collapse from exhaustion. And then in that collapsed state is when you suffocate. And it usually takes a long time for the person to die. However, with Jesus, it only took him 3 hours because of all the previous events that he had put up with between the scourging and crying of thorns and the beatings. Verse 48. And one of them at once ran and took a sponge filled with vinegar and put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink. But the other said, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him." And Jesus cried again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The curtain of the temple. In the temple, the curtain is what separated, all right, the people and the Holy of Holies, all right, the inner chamber that would have held the Ark of the Covenant and where the Shekinah, the glory cloud, is. And so 2 things are shown by this curtain being torn. 1, the divide between God and man is over, all right? Through Christ's death, Christ he is the bridge builder, right? He is the high priest. He has enabled God and man to once again dwell with each other. And then secondly, the temple of Jerusalem is also shown to be empty. There is no glory cloud there, right? There is no Ark of the Covenant with the stone tablets in there. The temple is empty. All right. The temple is no longer how God dwells with his people on earth. Okay. But it is now through Jesus. All right. It's the Son, all right, being given that God now dwells with his assembly. Okay. With his church. And the earth shook and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. All right, so notice it's the bodies of these people are also being raised. So is this like an early assumption for like the holy men of the Old Testament that they also, their bodies are now in heaven? Okay, so you get a lot of bodies being raised. And there's this is just another example in the Bible of assumptions taking place, which when you understand these assumptions, then the tradition of the Assumption of Mary makes a lot more sense as well. When the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." There were also many women there, looking on from afar, who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, among whom were Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who also was a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. And Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb, and departed. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb. Next day, that is, after the day of the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember how that impostor said while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will rise again.' Therefore order the tomb to be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples go and steal him away. And tell the people he has risen from the dead. And the last fraud will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard of soldiers. Go, make it as secure as you can." So they went and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone and setting a guard. Now, after the Sabbath, so this is the beginning of a new week. All right, and for the Jews, the Sabbath concluded the week, and all four Gospels mention that the Sabbath has been finished. Toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat upon it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. And for fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men. All right, so that all happened before the women arrived at the tomb. All right, you get that from the context of the other Gospels. But the angel said to the woman, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has risen, as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead, and behold, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you." So they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and said, "Hail." And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to him, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brethren to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." While they were going, behold, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. And when they had assembled with the elders And taking counsel, they gave a sum of money to the soldiers and said, "Tell the people, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So they took the money and did as they were directed. And this story has been spread among the Jews to this day. All right, the story has been spread among the Jews to this day. That note is local knowledge for his local audience. Okay, obviously it's not like the same gossip that's going around and about. Okay, so this, for lines like that, you gotta understand the immediate historical context. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the close of the age." Right? Thus ends the gospel according to Matthew. So, fortunately, because of the length of course time, we won't be able to go over the other synoptic gospels. And based on the rate we're going, I have doubts that we'll even make it to John's gospel. But there you at least get the sense of the story. Okay, the Gospels, I know I've said several times that the wisdom literature is very relevant for you guys to read through. I also want to encourage you over this break during Holy Week to read through Mark and Luke and John, especially all their passion narratives as well, right? Because they each they tell the same story, right? But then there's additional details added in each one. Mark will fill you in with a lot of details for a Gentile audience, okay, that might be confusing to us. Luke will tell you extra stories in regards to the women who were there and in regards to sinners who have turned to penance. And then John's gospel will give you even more of the perspective of Jesus as the new Moses, okay, the one who is divine, etc. So we'll conclude with that for today. Enjoy your break and your vacation, and hopefully this is the last online lecture, but if things continue to be closed, then we'll continue with this format.